Hello! How's everybody doing?
Hi.
We're here we were just talking about episode 70, which is crazy. And if you go by
Which
math,
means that we started this 7 weeks ago.
Django's a little, in my ears, he's a little garbly, so let us know if there's an issue. Um, but we have John and Dale and Sarge and Cal. Welcome, everybody. Um, but if you do the math, right, there's 52 weeks in a year, and we started this 2 years ago, and we've done 70 episodes. So we've done really well at totally never missing a week.
Never.
We've never missed a week ever. We've been right smack dab on time all of the time. But yeah, so we want to talk about concepts of the chosen one today. So there's obviously Anakin. There's been some debate as to whether or not, there's that line in Revenge of the Sith, which I think we talked a lot about in our Revenge of the Sith stream, it would have been.
Right.
But the Yoda's line, a prophecy that misread could have been, and did that mean they were wrong about Anakin? I think coming out of Rise of Skywalker, people are wondering if it was never Anakin, and was it, is it Rey now? And then I think when you go to Legends, there's other characters we can talk about. So we kind of wanted to get into what that meant, what that is in Star Wars. Now that we've seen all the saga films.
Well, and there's the episode where Obi-Wan says that he thinks Luke must have been the chosen one.
Yes.
And that he was wrong about that. And a lot of people point to that too.
Yes. As to whether or not it could be. And it's hard for me to even hear that without just diving into my opinion. So you and I were doing some pre-stream chatting earlier, and where we kind of came down on is I still firmly believe, if you want to say there's the chosen one, I still think Anakin is the chosen one.
Right.
And that there's something different about him. And I think that it neglects a very big part of his character to not think that he's special, because no matter what, he is the immaculate conception character in Star Wars. No matter who Luke is or who Rey is or anybody else, Anakin is the only character that we're aware of that has a parent that is the Force. And welcome, Patrick. Dale says, "Are there more than one chosen ones? Isn't it the chosen one sort of thing?" So Dale has emphasized the chosen one, but Django, when you and I were talking earlier, I think you and I were emphasizing the chosen one as opposed to a chosen one. So we would look at the article in the sentence and not the number there. Because I think coming out of Rise of Skywalker, I think it's fair to say that Rey is a chosen one. I think it's even fair to say Ben/Kylo is a chosen one, which is different than the chosen one.
Right. I mean, and I'm still going to stand up for Anakin just because, Anakin, like you said, is the only person we know that was born of the Force.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever you think about other characters that have, destinies that border on, bringing balance or those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Rey fits that. And I think, as you said, I think Ben sort of does, and I think Luke sort of does to a certain extent. But Anakin is the only one that we know was, conceived without a father.
Right.
And if we look to, we were looking up before the stream too, specifically the prophecy as it's listed in Master and Apprentice, then that it says one born of the Force.
Yep.
And I think Anakin is unique in that regard. And so I think that's why, and I think we're both on the same page with that, why we say that Anakin is still the chosen one, even if there are other people that are chosen for similar or sort of parallel purposes.
Yeah, I would say that. Also, welcome, Solo Pirate. Yeah, I think that there is something to that. And I remember if you go back to our pre Rise of Skywalker stream, I had said like the one thing I didn't want was for Rey to replace Anakin.
Right.
And what we got in Rise of Skywalker is one line and one line only. But it was enough for me, and that's during her "Be with Me" scene on Exegol. We hear Hayden, we hear Anakin say, "Balance the Force like I did."
Mm-hmm.
And it's one thing for Anakin in life to be cocky or think a lot of himself, but Anakin in the Force, I don't think would make up a thing about himself. So to me, that's 100% confirmation that
Right.
Anakin balanced the Force, but because he balanced the Force, that doesn't mean it stayed balanced,
Right.
and that there's something else going on in what's happening in the sequel trilogy 30 years later.
Right. Well, there used to be a lot of people even before we had the sequel trilogy who like refused to read any EU books,
Mm-hmm.
post Return of the Jedi because they thought, oh, because everything hasn't been solved, then that
Right.
somehow undermines, Anakin's like balance and sacrifice in Return of the Jedi. And I was obviously never one of those people, but
Mm-hmm.
that was the point of view. But what do you think about? And I know you and I have talked about this before because one of the things that intrigues me about this idea of chosen ones in balance, I kind of borrow from the Matrix trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the idea that you might get a series of chosen ones because
Right.
like in the Matrix, Neo is built into the program,
Mm-hmm.
and so like there'll be one Neo, and then that plays out, and then there's another one, and that plays out, and then
Right.
there's another one, and so we think of Anakin as the chosen one, but if you think about it in that broader perspective, then maybe there are more people that are called for the same purpose when that need arises again,
Mm-hmm.
especially if we go with the Plagueis, which is Legends, but kind of understanding that Anakin is created by the Force as a response to something particular.
Well, and if we're going to talk about Legends too, because I put Revan on the thumbnail for a reason, and this was
Yeah.
something else that we were kind of talking. Welcome, Soji. Um, that if we go, this is Legends territory, but it's also kind of dubious now because Revan's been pseudo recanonized. His name is recanonized in the Rise of
Right.
Skywalker visual dictionary. There were Sith Trooper legions named after a couple of Sith lords from Legends, Revan being one of them. His name is recanonized, not necessarily his story. In the same way that Bane has been recanonized in Clone Wars season 6, Yoda meets a Force ghost of Bane that could easily just be a vision. So again, he's like in canon still, but we don't know to what degree his story stands. But
Right.
they've always been two really interesting figures to me in Star Wars because Revan is that character who was a Jedi master, well, was a Jedi, what became a Dark Lord of the Sith, and then like became a Jedi again, and somebody who arguably knew both sides of the Force intimately, um,
Right.
and finding that balance within it canonically himself, um, and how that plays out. But when you played KOTOR, it talked about this character called the Sithari, and the Sithari
Mm-hmm.
was going to be somebody who rebuilt the Sith and changed them. And a lot of people thought it was going to be Revan, and then I think it's generally understood. I personally believe it in Legends canon to be Darth Bane. But the reason why I bring that up is I thought Bane was kind of how the Force got out of balance. That whatever Bane did as the Sithari is what put the Force out of balance, which is why we needed Anakin, the Chosen One, as a
Mm-hmm.
response, starting all the way back with Bane. And
Right.
Palpatine was a Sith in the line of Bane. So again, that's kind of secondary information. It's something I talked about in the Balance of the Force series I did on here like 2 years ago, which is really outdated
Right.
now because it doesn't talk about anything from Master of the Apprentice or like um, Dooku Jedi Lost or anything. So I'm gonna update some stuff there soon. Well, by soon in my time, it'll be another year, but it will happen eventually.
Right.
Um, but like I think that there's such a thing where if the light and the dark are constantly in this push and pull, that they would constantly create this need for a response to what the other side is doing.
Right. Well, and especially maybe this takes us a little bit too far afield too, but I know that one of your, I don't know if this is actually what you think or it's just an idea you like tossing around, but
Mm-hmm.
I know you've said before that when Palpatine says that he's all the Sith, like if there's some sort of like he's like actually like absorbed or
Right,
like passed on, like literally from Bane forward,
right.
then that takes on a different kind of meaning there too. Um,
Well, that's something I'm interested in. It's something that I don't really want to latch onto until we know what it means. Because on the one hand, it could just be Palpatine blowing smoke.
right, sure.
I never I never write off Palpatine just blowing smoke. Um, or blowing Snoke. Maybe that sounds terrible now that I said it out
Oh,
loud.
yep, yep. We'll pretend that didn't happen.
But I it could just be that, but it could also be that he's absorbed. And I've been seeing some stuff going around in some of the discussion areas that I'm in because if you go to the Sith Emperor in the Old Republic, the MMO, who's
Mm-hmm.
also in the Revan novel, Viatate, I don't know exactly how to say his name. He can
Yeah,
absorb other people's energies, and he like
right,
takes them all in. I've seen some people wondering if Palpatine isn't him, but like he's not. Like the Sith Emperor from Tor is not in current canon. A lot of people like to pretend like SWOTOR is in canon, and it's not.
yeah,
But I think Palpatine could be taking from that. So it's possible that he is, but it's kind of become my head canon now that until we know otherwise, that Palpatine either is representative of or is the actual imbalance in the Force. And
mm-hmm.
like that's why Anakin killing him, and we know he died because he says in Rise of Skywalker, "I've died before," so
Right,
that happened. So whether or not, or like if if or Vader slash Anakin killing Palpatine balanced the Force, but then Palpatine came back, it puts the Force out of balance again. And
right,
I think that's why in some way that I mean even the dyad in the Force itself could have been a response to that.
right,
If Ben was tormented since the womb, then presumably Palpatine was at least in some way back since a year after Return of the Jedi.
mm-hmm.
And so his like eventual return and then Rey's birth, that could be where the dyad came from. And the dyad could be a response to it. I think to me, what I haven't settled on, and I'm not sure is even answerable with the text that we have so far, is the dyad a response to the Force being out of balance, and Rey is the half that achieves it, or is Rey this kind of new chosen one, and the dyad just happens to be, because
Mm-hmm.
the way it plays out in the film, I'm not sure the dyad is actually consequential to the defeat of the Sith as much as it
Right,
is a way for Rey and Ben to communicate, which is essential to the extent that them talking is what got Ben back to the light, but not
right,
necessarily consequential to Palpatine's defeat.
right. Well, and I think part of it too depends on. I mean, because Snoke says the darkness rises and the
Right.
light to meet it,
Yep.
and so like if that's a reference to this, maybe, but I mean, I think you can see the dyad as a thing that happened that is
Mm-hmm.
kind of separate from, Palpatine's resurrection,
Mm-hmm.
or and again, the extent to which you believe this depends on how much you think that the Force has like an actual like will and makes choices and wants things and
Mm-hmm.
causes things to happen versus the more cosmic view where it's just everything connected in that way,
Right.
because like if it is the sort of more like force of nature type of thing,
Mm-hmm.
then a chosen one is created because like almost like a Newtonian like
Mm-hmm.
equal and opposite reaction kind of thing. The Sithari leads to the Chosen One,
Right.
or the return of Palpatine. The Force says, "Heck no, we've done this already. Here's a dyad to solve this."
Right.
And like however you interpret the willfulness of the Force
Mm-hmm.
might change how you um, view
What
both of these
happened?
issues altogether. Yeah.
That's fair. And to me, I think where I've kind of come down on the dyad is that if if Palpatine, the you like the Emperor, not the family, is
Mm-hmm.
the imbalance, and Anakin is the response to the imbalance, then both of those families having this lineage at the same time, like their fates are linked because they are like the positive and negative within the universe, if that kind of makes
Mm-hmm.
sense.
Yeah.
And like even where Palpatine was alive and Luke was around, we don't know when Palpatine Jr. came on the scene.
Right.
And so, based off of any number of things, it's like, why would the dyad form between Ben and Ray and not Luke and Junior?
Right.
For any number of reasons. Does it skip a generation? Is it just because there was an age discrepancy? Is it because when Junior was born, or grown out of his vat or whatever, that the galaxy was still in darkness? Did it happen before or after Return of the Jedi? That sort of thing. It would have had to have happened before Return of the Jedi, unless Junior has growth acceleration, I suppose.
Right. Well, and most people seem to think too that, Lil Sheev
Mm-hmm.
is not force sensitive either, and
I don't
that's
think he is personally. I don't think Daddy Sheev would have let Baby Sheev go without a fight if he was force sensitive.
right.
I think
Right.
my headcanon, until I'm told otherwise, is that he wasn't, which is why he was allowed to leave and wasn't tracked down specifically.
Right. I mean, and
Um,
I think a lot of this also depends. And again, I don't want to retread ground for a series you've already done.
mm-hmm.
Like you said, even if it might need to be updated
Yeah.
now, but I think how you view a chosen one, at least in part, matters depending on what you think balance means.
Right.
Because when we get a pretty succinctly written out version of a prophecy in Master and Apprentice,
Mm-hmm.
talking about the chosen one bringing balance. And my understanding, and this was largely, I won't say largely, but at least
Mm-hmm.
partially based off the way that the NJO ends too. And I don't want to spoil things for you,
I mean,
but
at this point, it's pretty old.
yeah, well, but still, Corin's granddad was a Jedi,
Yep.
so, but um, that's an inside joke for people that weren't following. That was just for us. But um, what was I going to say? Oh, but I always thought that it was Anakin's mastery of both sides of the Force that
Mm-hmm.
brought some semblance of balance, and I don't know if I still believe that
Mm-hmm.
anymore. But I always used to say, Yoda says, the dark side can only master you,
Mm-hmm.
and that's his warning to Luke. And that's why I thought Revan was a chosen one type of person,
Mm-hmm.
because he essentially masters his own darkness, not just through his own actions.
Mm-hmm.
But so I don't know what that means anymore, because I think I feel differently about balance. And so like what a chosen one is, if the chosen one brings balance, I think depends partially on what you think of as balance. And so
Right.
if a chosen one is the person that brings balance, then I think Ray has to fit that that
Right.
guideline, because
Yeah.
Anakin says so,
Yep. Real quick, John Barry said maybe because of Leia, a dyad couldn't. I think he means couldn't form among three, as to why like Luke and Junior wouldn't have had a dyad, and that makes sense because like there would have already been like a duality between Luke and Leia. So
Mm.
then Leia having a child and Luke not allowed it. I could see that. Solo says, "Has there been any matter of fact that Anakin killing Sheev was bringing balance?" We've already just well, we're going off the line of Rise of Skywalker when Anakin says to Rey, "Balance the Force like I did." That to me is the most matter of fact explanation.
Right.
And then John Barry has a video on this topic, which people should go check out.
I mean,
Um,
and apart from the line in Rise of Skywalker, that was always just what George said, right? That it
yeah,
was,
that's
it was
what it was.
killing Palpatine. And so I think that's where we kind of had that assumption for a long time,
Yeah,
because that was back in the the era of G canon and
yeah,
everything else. That anything George said was what we went with, regardless of whatever else we
we
might have.
had. In terms of balance, I think, and this is part of why I kind of want to update the videos I'd done prior. I think it, and like I'm almost afraid to say this because I don't want to get into a discourse discussion, but I'm going to say this as a matter of fact statement and it's not commentary. But I think that it's very possible that Ryan and JJ had different visions on where the Force should end up in 9.
Right.
At the end of the day, we have JJ's vision, and you can prefer or not, or whichever one you want, but we have one. Because coming out of Last Jedi, a lot of people had the assumption. I've said on videos before that I thought where 9 was going to be like this reevaluation of the dark side, and that
Mm-hmm.
Mortis. Yeah, YouTube's been funky with the notifications lately, Dale. That Mortis was showing us that the dark side wasn't intrinsically evil, which I still kind of believe, but
Right.
it's how you use it. But then, I think back to, if we want to go to Master and Apprentice, there's that wonderful Qui-Gon quote that's on the back of Master and Apprentice, which is how important it is, which is that, you know, prior to that novel, golden poster boy of the supposed Grey Jedi, Qui-Gon Jinn, said that he goes to the light because the light's what's important. And I've kind of come around on this idea of, now we're getting a little off topic, but I promise it matters when I get around to the point. But I think the way I see the dark side now is kind of like Prometheus stealing fire. Like,
Right.
the dark side in of itself is not necessarily evil, but it's not something that mortals are
Mm-hmm.
supposed to wield. And that if you are alive, you should be using the living force, and the living force is connected to the light side, and the dark side is something for either force beings like the Bendu, or the force itself. But where I kind of get into that with balance is, I think that's why you can have Rey be all the Jedi and reflect the power of Palpatine claiming he's all of the Sith, and destroy the Sith again,
Right.
and have that be a representation of balance.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think so too, but I think that also fits with, my previous understanding too, that
Mm-hmm.
if it's Prometheus who's not supposed to be able to use fire, but it turns out Anakin can,
Right.
then that becomes a different way of understanding, balance too, which again supports a certain type of view of what it means to be a chosen one.
Right.
If Anakin is the one that had that ability when other people did not,
Mm-hmm.
then that's what makes it special. And maybe he is, I've never thought about it this way, but maybe he is more like the Bendu than other people
Yep.
because he is born of the Force. So he is part Force himself.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, and I've always thought that Mortis had interesting takeaways for what it meant for Anakin to be the chosen one too.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
Not that they remember any of it, but
But still, but for us, and I think Mortis is one big metaphor. The Mortis episodes, anyway, not necessarily the place. For us to kind of understand what's happening in the prequel and original trilogies.
mm,
But yeah, no, I think you're right. I think even the idea of a chosen one could mean like someone the Force allows to do things that other people shouldn't. But that kind of gets to the point of where I think Rey is a chosen one, like maybe not in a balancer. I don't necessarily see Rey as a balancer per se. I see Rey as a redeemer. Hence the video I did called Rey the Redeemer, which is something a little bit different. But Rey doesn't balance the light and the dark. Rey overcomes her arguably inherent darkness, and chooses the
mm,
light instead, versus Anakin, who's somebody who can balance both. And maybe that's the difference between being the chosen one, prophesied to bring balance to the Force, and the one who, the one who could finally get rid of this dark legacy of Palpatine. Like, I kind of think of
Right.
it as the reason why it was Rey who defeated Palpatine and not Ben is that they already tried a Skywalker destroying a Palpatine and it didn't work.
Right.
And maybe it needed to be a Palpatine fighting a Palpatine. Like, even though Rey never personally says, I take on the name, but rather her rejecting that name, rejecting that legacy, and putting an end to it is what can cause Palpatine to stay gone this time.
Right. Well, and to go back to what balance might mean, George always said that balance is, the light winning out. But if
Mhm.
balance is something more neutral,
Right.
then maybe Anakin accomplished that purpose, and what Rey does is swing things more back towards the light.
That's
And
true.
Anakin brings it back to zero, and then Rey takes it into the plus. Um,
Well, the prophecy you had from Master and Apprentice specifically said it requires Jedi sacrifices. You have it up still?
I do. Let me pull it up. It's a long one, so just stick with me. It says, "Only through the sacrifice of many Jedi will the Order cleanse the sin done to the nameless." I wonder if Rey being nameless, I don't know, something there. "The danger of the past is not past, but sleeps in an egg. When the egg cracks, it will threaten the galaxy entire. When the force itself sickens, past and future must split and combine. It says, a chosen one, for whatever word, a chosen one shall come, born of no father, and through him will ultimate balance and the force be restored."
There you go. So, I mean, we have the sacrifice of the Jedi. Like, I kind of wonder, going off this, I don't know that I necessarily agree with this, but like, just in the name of brainstorming, if going off of what you just said, Anakin takes it back to zero, and then Rey kind of takes it back towards the light. Um, the Force was arguably probably at some point in galactic history towards the light, and then the Sith, whether it was Palpatine for a long time being all of the Sith, or Palpatine with a backstory from Plagueis, which isn't canon anymore, but maybe just is canon but isn't.
Right.
Regardless of how that goes, the Force sickens when the dark side comes back, and so what Anakin has to do is kind of like wipe the slate clean, which he does. He kills all the Jedi and kills all the Sith.
Yep.
Now, maybe there was a way to do that didn't involve mass amounts of murder, but it was Anakin, so he did what he did. Mondo, welcome. Good to see you here. And then Rey can kind of tip it back into this kind of fresh start. But even then, I'm not sure that Rey necessarily leaves the Force in the light as much as I think she stops the corruptive nature and the corrupted legacy of Palpatine. Because we really are back to zero. Hey Gina, welcome. Because not to hit on a spot that's going to make some people sad, because I know people are reacting to this more strongly than others, and I know that people are seeing it more one way or another. But we leave episode 9 with all the biological Skywalkers dead. And so there is this notion of starting over, fresh start kind of thing. And maybe that's really what Rey was doing, rather than bringing the light or into power, or bringing whatever. Maybe she was just like, she didn't kill the Skywalkers, but the Skywalkers did kind of systematically sacrifice themselves, either for each other and then ultimately for Rey. And then Rey is the reason why Palpatine, I would say Palpatine died by his own power, but she does channel it back at him.
Right.
So I don't know.
I think you could also make an argument, and again, not that I necessarily believe this, but I think there's something to the idea that, and we were kind of talking along these lines earlier, that the entire Skywalker line is chosen because Anakin is.
Yeah.
And so maybe part of Anakin's chosen oneness is not just what he does, but what his descendants do too.
Yeah.
And then when that purpose is served, Leia becomes one with the Force, and Ben becomes one with the Force, and maybe that's part of that explanation too. Is that it was done. It was finally done, and now like the entire line like returns to the Force because that's where it came from.
I'm not gonna lie, you're blowing my mind a little bit right now.
I mean, because Anakin is born of the Force,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
Like the
yeah,
Force
yeah.
intervenes in Shmi Skywalker,
Yeah.
and like it's not just what Anakin does, but the job wasn't done
Yeah.
with Anakin, and so Luke and Leia, and then by extension Ben,
Yeah.
and then maybe in the dyad Rey,
Mm-hmm.
and then like one of the reasons why Leia and Ben go together is because the job's done.
The job's done. Wow, that's a really good point. It's kind of making me think here. I like that a lot.
I mean, I just came up with that right now on the fly, so I don't.
That's why we never really prepare before the streams, because then we would never have these moments on stream.
I mean, there's probably huge flaws with that I haven't considered.
No, but like
a 20-second old theory, but
still, I kind of like that idea, because too, if you think about like it's a Jedi prophecy, right? The one that's in Master and Apprentice.
Yeah.
And I think to an extent, somebody who's having a prophecy like that is open to the Force, is going to be hearing what the Force is going to be said, or is saying, but they're also going to be constrained by their own kind of understanding. So if they think this is a Jedi prophecy, they're not going to assume that this chosen one is going to have children, because Jedi don't have children. In theory, I mean, some of them did, but they're not supposed to. And that could that kind of mental block could cause them to not see the full story. Because like I've always held, we started with this quote towards the beginning of the stream, Yoda's line, a prophecy that misread could have been. Everyone likes to say that they misread the prophecy and it's really Luke or somebody else, and not that it's Anakin. And I always took it as, it's Anakin, they misread what Anakin's supposed to do. The prophecy itself could be wrong, not the person. And so then maybe because either Anakin doesn't fulfill the prophecy as is correctly, or maybe the prophecy doesn't have the whole picture, that the chosen oneness, like you're saying, is inherited into Luke and Leia, by extension Ben. But I mean, even to we mentioned earlier when Obi-Wan thought in Rebels, was it Rebels where but I always took that as just Obi-Wan, like he couldn't bear the thought that a prophecy of like balance coming back to the galaxy was wrong, and so he was like, well, it couldn't be that Anakin messed up, it has to be that it's really Luke. And so I never took it as that hey Stuart, welcome. I never took it as it was like Obi-Wan can be wrong, but Obi-Wan being wrong doesn't mean that everybody else was, I guess. Or he at least let Maul think that that's true, Cal. I feel like we've just gone off in like 5 different directions.
We have, but I mean, to stick with the Luke thing for a minute too, because like part of Anakin being the chosen one and bringing balance, like you have to wrestle with whether he ever would have done that absent Luke's intervention. And so Luke may not be the chosen one, but Luke as a form of redeemer, just like we say about Rey, like unless Luke had brought out the good in Anakin may have never achieved that balance. And I feel like we've talked about this before, the idea that if Anakin had not done it, then the Force would have like made another one. Like because like I'm trying to remember when we talked about this. I don't know if it was the Vader comic when we were doing Fortress Vendor like that. But we talked about the idea that if Anakin was a reaction and Palpatine had killed him, then the Force might have said, okay, here's another one. And he would have just kept sending chosen ones until the job was done.
Well, that came up because of the Freddie Prinze Jr. rant.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah.
I mean, I still don't know what stream we talked about on, but in Freddie Prinze Jr.'s now infamous rant, which everyone should listen to because it's great, talks about how he was told by Dave, who was told by George, that the reason why Palpatine turns Anakin is because then the chosen one isn't dead, therefore the Force isn't going to send another chosen one.
Another one, yeah.
But to go to your point on Luke, again, if we think of this idea of Newtonian law, like everything has an equal and opposite reaction. Yeah, Anakin may never have come back to the light side without Luke, but if Anakin had never married Padme and had kids, would he have fallen to the dark side?
Sure, yeah.
So, like, is the thing that, if he had made the Jedi choice and learned how to let go of his attachments and learned how to kind of be his own person without needing to have, like, this possessive love over another person, to the point where he had gone to the dark side, if he could have I'm showing my bias here of, I think love is great, but maybe not for Jedi. And a lot of people would disagree with me on that. And maybe that's part of why I'm okay with the end of Rise of Skywalker. But anyway, even though I still like that space kiss an awful lot. But hey. But if Anakin had never made that choice, Luke never would have been born, but Anakin also may never have fallen to the dark. But Anakin did follow the dark because of this choice. So then, are Luke and Leia the Force's response to Anakin falling?
Maybe so. It's the Force saying, here's a way to fix it.
Yep, I'm giving you a safety raft.
Right.
And again, that goes down to how much consciousness do you think the Force has? Because and this is inevitably, I think, the issue with the Force, as we all try to understand the Force, is, on the one hand, Lucas came up with the Force pulling heavily from Eastern mythology, and ideology, which I am not super versed on, but the idea of yin and yang, and that there is dark and light, and that they're not necessarily like you need both, right? That you don't want one to win. But so Lucas had that idea of dark and light and yin and yang, and yet has always maintained that the light is what wins, which is a very Western idea. So you're trying to blend Western and Eastern ways of thinking, and I think that's why the Force is just really freaking confusing. And I think that's where it gets confusing when you get to the Force's will. Is the Force a god, a deity, a being that can make these decisions? Or is the Force like a river that's just trying to get to the bottom of the mountain?
Yeah.
And that's what balance is, and it doesn't care, and it's just going to carve its path down the mountain. And everything it does is dispassionate, right? Is the Force Thanos snapping his fingers? We don't have those answers, because I think the folks at Lucasfilm have decided not to answer those questions.
Right. Well, I mean, in a lot of ways, this would be a less interesting question if we had definitive answers.
That's true.
That maybe is unsatisfying, but I think it's true. But I also think too. I was going somewhere and it escaped from me. What I was going to say is too, I think a lot of this presumes like whether or not you think, I mean, because Luke says in The Last Jedi, the Jedi don't have a right to this. Like they don't have the monopoly on what it means to be Force users.
Right.
And so like we use Jedi and Sith in ways that I don't know, maybe those as orders. I mean, I think there's, but it doesn't have to necessarily mean that it's something that a Jedi does that brings balance either. If it's something, especially if you see the Force as a river,
right?
And it's following its sort of physical properties, then like the Jedi is one type of light side user that may not necessarily be the be all end all of what it means to follow the Force.
Yeah, well, and that's a thing too. Like a lot of what Luke has to say in Last Jedi has kind of thrown a wrench into how some people see things, but I feel like a lot of what he's saying isn't as complicated as people like to make it sound. Like Luke is on this tirade about how the Jedi don't own the Force, and to say they are is vanity. And I always love how he gets to that line, because he's literally sitting there with Rey, and he's like, okay, reach out and touch the Force. And she's like, all right. And they're like, what do you sense? And she tells him what he senses, and he's like, don't you see how the Jedi owning the Force is wrong? And I'm like, okay, we went from 3 to 8, and I missed 4, 5, 6, and 7, where we said that the Jedi owning the Force was a thing. I don't remember that sentence popping up. And so I always kind of have taken that line as Luke just being he's a teacher, but then he's also if you can imagine like exiled Luke's Facebook posts, like they would probably be like everybody would be muting Luke on Facebook. Is basically what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
Exiled Luke hangs out on Twitter and 4chan. He's not on Facebook.
He's just like no. And so I think there's a certain point there where, yeah, the Jedi were at the time were in prequel era were vain. They had this arrogance that they understood the light side of the Force better than anyone else. But I don't think that means that therefore, if there are Jedi, that's how it is. Like,
Yeah.
I've always kind of like, it's weird for me to make a sports analogy because I don't really get sports for the most part. But like, I see like if the Force is basketball, then like the Jedi or the NBA. But that doesn't mean they're the only people that play basketball. But like, you have to be really, really good with it to make it in the NBA.
Sure.
And like that's about as far as I can carry a sports metaphor. But like that's how I've always seen it.
I mean, and I think this takes us maybe too far afield from the way of talking about chosen ones too.
Mm-hmm.
But I think about it this way too. You know that even if the Jedi are right in their dogma about the Force, that does not mean that everything about their dogma is correct.
Right.
You know, the Jedi could be right in how they view the Force, but wrong in saying, you know, we're going to have, you know, every other Tuesday you have to clean the bathrooms or something. Like,
exactly.
like taken together, that doesn't mean that everything is correct. You know, and then this is where you get to arguments that they were wrong about, you know, what type of attachments you were allowed to. Like,
Right.
they could be right about a lot of things and be in that NBA and still say, you know, maybe you shouldn't have practice every day.
Right.
You know, like
Yeah,
you can
exactly.
be wrong in the margins and right in the things that matter.
Yeah, they could be wrong about, you know, age to start your training. They could be wrong about like you said, what attachments you're supposed to have. I think a lot of people somehow have watched the prequel trilogy and decided that the Jedi are the villains of the prequel trilogy. And I know we talked about this in probably all of our prequel streams,
Yeah.
but
Well, we had a special stream about where the Jedi are wrong too.
yeah, right.
So.
But to me, the Jedi story is supposed to be tragic, and like it's tragic because they are wrong. It's tragic because they have this arrogance. Hey, Nolan, it's tragic because they um they screw up, and because of them, the galaxy's lost. But not because they're bad, but because they screwed up. You're supposed, in my opinion, or at least this is how I watch it. Like when I watch the Jedi, I'm not like those Jedi, man. They just like were the worst and stuff. I'm like, dude, that could be me. I could be so convinced of how right I am that I burn a bunch of people, and like that's the lesson I take from the Jedi.
And I think there's truth to that.
Yeah. And so I think it's the Jedi are supposed to be the most right or the most good, but that doesn't mean that they are good. Like they could be the most good, but only be 60% good. Like there's nothing that says that they're even close. Now we're really getting away from chosen ones, but like.
Well, but I think there's also an interesting question in when Anakin brings balance. Is he a Jedi in that moment? He is still the chosen one, but did he stop? I mean, he obviously stopped being a Jedi at some point. Does his redemption, you know, like renew his membership card, or is he still is he something else now?
Does he sign a new contract? Hey, Rez, welcome.
Or, you know, like in the Anakin Obi-Wan comic, you know, that was his whole thing, is Anakin was thinking about leaving the Order.
Right.
Had he left the Order, would he still be the chosen one?
Yeah.
Would he still be? I mean, he's still the one born of the Force.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and to me,
I think it's an interesting question there too.
That's always been my thing too, for all the people who want like the alternate histories of the prequel trilogy and like, could this have saved Anakin or that have saved Anakin? I'm like, what if Anakin wasn't a Jedi but was supported by the Jedi? Like, how would things have looked?
Right.
But yeah, so I think that there's a case where if you are a Jedi and you've committed, that means you've committed your whole life to studying the Force and opening to the Force. Noel, welcome. And in theory, if you are being a true Jedi and you're not mired in the bureaucracy and the complacency and the dogma of the Jedi Order in the prequel trilogy, but you're actually being a Jedi, something much closer to like what Qui-Gon was, then you probably are somebody who can understand the Force's will and see the balance and have that. Not on the nature of Jedi are intrinsically better, but on the nature of you've devoted your whole life to it.
Right. I mean, because then my next question, and maybe this makes it more complicated than it's worth, because Palpatine tells him there's certain things you can't learn from the Jedi.
Yeah.
And if those things were things that he needed to know and experience in order to fulfill his chosen one destiny, then maybe he had to go down that path because he needed an understanding of the Force that was bigger than what the Jedi's adherence to the correct rules.
Yeah.
Mind you, still if we say they're correct.
Yeah.
Like maybe he needed to be incorrect in order to understand how to be balanced. Maybe he needed to feel the dark side in order to know what it meant to reject it.
Yeah. Well, in the same way, again, if we then want to carry it into Rise of Skywalker, did Rey need to know finally where she came from for her to finally know who she is?
Right.
That kind of that same nature. But I completely agree. Like, I don't think that Anakin is necessarily a Jedi at the end of Return of the Jedi. Like in the same context, or even then, let's look at Ahsoka. Ahsoka leaves the Jedi Order, and throughout Rebels says she's not a Jedi, but no one would say she's a Darksider, and no one would say she doesn't have an understanding of the Force. She's just left the Jedi Order because the Jedi Order kind of screwed her over, really screwed her over.
Right.
And that doesn't rob her of her light-sidedness. And I think that's the point that Luke's trying to make. He just takes it to a very dramatic extreme.
Right.
And maybe the Jedi at the time couldn't really see that, but we get characters like Chirrut, and no one's going to say that Chirrut doesn't understand the Force just because he can't, levitate in the air and flip rocks around and stuff. Like, I would trust what Chirrut has to say about the Force no matter what.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I guess we're going into what are chosen ones. Are there more than one chosen one? What does that mean? I think that I still hold that there's something special about Anakin, and that Anakin had to undo something really, really large and maybe built up over several centuries, and that's why it took somebody partly born of the Force, and that what you were saying, maybe he could use the dark because he was born part of it, and that sort of, or part of the Force itself, that sort of thing. But I think that there are always people within the Force that the Force has given a destiny to, and that might not always be balancing, that might mean, some other kind of quest, or whether or not it's just the darkness rises in the light to meet it, and it's just that simple. So I think there can be more than one person that the Force has chosen to do a thing. I think the Force can be balanced and rebalanced, but I still think there's something special about Anakin.
Right. Well, and I think too, maybe this is semantic, but I think there's a difference between being given a destiny and being chosen. To say, because like everyone has a destiny, at least according to how the Jedi see it. Like everyone has a purpose, but that's different than saying I'm choosing you, especially if choosing involves the Force saying I'm at least partially creating you. Like that's just an entirely different thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's why at the end of the day, for me, regardless of the fact that I think there might be other chosen ones, or a chosen one, or whatever, like Anakin has to be special because we know his origin is special.
Yep.
Like, and it has to be that way because that's what we've seen, and unless somebody's going to argue that Shmi was wrong when she said there was no father, until that point, Anakin's special, and he was used for a special purpose, even if that purpose was, like I said earlier, not just him but his descendants.
Right.
But
Soul Pirate asks, does somebody have to be in the order to be a Jedi? I mean, like, if we look at the Jedi as like a religious group, right? And a Jedi is like a priest within the religious group, then, like, yeah, you have to be Catholic to be a Catholic priest. You can't be like, I'm a Catholic priest, but I'm Methodist. And I think this is something that a lot of people get confused with Jedi, is like, Jedi does not mean Lightsider. Sith does not mean Darksider. Snoke was not a Sith. Kylo was technically not a Sith ever, maybe a Sith for like a month under Palpatine.
Right.
Even though he was a Darksider. Night Sisters are not Sith. Chirrut is not a Jedi. Jedi is specific training, it's a specific order, it's a specific class, but that does not mean, and it's people in Star Wars who don't understand the difference. I mean, we saw that even in Fallen Order. People don't understand that, like, laymen inside of Star Wars don't get it. Because people probably wouldn't. But yeah, like, you have to be in the order to be a Jedi, because Jedi is a title. It's not a cosmic place in the universe, I don't think.
I mean, it's why there's no such thing as a gray Jedi.
Jedi, exactly.
Because it means something specific.
Yeah. You can't be like, I'm a Jedi, but I don't follow the Jedi rules. Well, then you're not a Jedi. Then you can be that and be something else, but that, or I call gray Jedi creasters. For those who don't know, that means you only go to church on Christmas and Easter. Dale says, yeah, myths have a purpose deeper than what Rey was meant to understand until her awakening. Yeah, like, you mean like how Luke Skywalker, I thought he was a myth, that sort of thing. I can see that. Nolan says, I almost think Anakin was chosen to act like a catalyst, maybe to show the Council their arrogance and promote future growth. They essentially start over after what could almost be like a cataclysmic event in that sense. I mean, it's possible. I do think it's tied in some way to what happens all the way in Return of the Jedi, though. Like, I think you're right that Anakin goes the path that he goes because of the Jedi are wrong in the prequel trilogy. I still think they're the most right in the prequel trilogy, but they're still wrong. They're at a good solid 60, 65%, and just everybody else is maybe at a 40. And I think Yoda especially is one of, and Obi-Wan, beyond the fact that they're the main two survivors, see that and see where they failed, Anakin and the Jedi as a whole. But I think that it can be both that and then some. I think there's a much larger metaphor. I think the prequel trilogy was always supposed to tie into the original trilogy being the true end of what that story was. I mean, that's just my opinion, but that's how I read it. Anybody else have some points? At this point, I feel like I'm just gonna keep repeating myself or start something entirely new over again. I still haven't stopped thinking about what you said, though, about how, like, all the Skywalkers die after the job is done. Like, I think there really is something. I think there's something to that. I really do. I really like that point.
This is where I pull off my Mission Impossible mask, and I've been J.J. Abrams this whole time.
It's funny that Cal brings up Kriya, because probably Thursday I'm gonna start streaming KOTOR 2 and mostly just argue with Kriya the whole time. So, like, my whole thing with KOTOR 2 is it asks really interesting questions that fanboys take way too literally. Like, I think that a lot of people think KOTOR 2 is saying something when really it's just not. It's just presenting different. Anyway, that's the whole thing. But, like, Kriya, her philosophy is just strange. Her philosophy is effectively, anytime you do something, it's wrong. That's what Kriya's philosophy is. It's very frustrating to me, in general.
I mean, you also have to take all that with a grain of salt too, because she's a Sith,
yeah,
and right? she's being self-serving in all of that too. Yep. So
she's literally lying and manipulating you the entire time. Ahsoka, I believe Dale says, was meant to be inspiring to Anakin to leave the Order as well, but he stayed and fell. That's another interesting thought, because I still think that Anakin, outside of the Jedi Order, who was allowed to kind of live his life, may not have fallen. But then we come back to the same old question of like, did Anakin have to fall? Like, did he choose to fall, or was that forced on? Which I think he did personally, but there's an argument to be made that maybe didn't. With both KOTOR 2 and TLJ, a lot of people seem to misunderstand the commentary on the balance between light and dark. I completely agree with you. Trolling Twitter, I'm not trolling on Twitter, but like going along Twitter these last 2 months, I've seen a lot of people who really love The Last Jedi that I'm convinced do not understand that movie at all. And that has been one of my great frustrations online. Is like, I don't know that you really watched the movie. I think you just watched certain scenes over and over again. That's my theory. But, that's okay. But yeah, I like KOTOR 2 a lot more than I like KOTOR 2 super fans. And I don't mean like you, and like, there's a lot of people who I've had really interesting discussions with, but then there are the people who are like, yeah, that Kreia man, like, she got it. I'm like, no, she didn't get it. She didn't actually. Like, those are the times when I'm like, I can't right now.
I like KOTOR 2 because I love Exile, but that's just me.
I like KOTOR 2 just because I love that time period. And I like the questions it poses. I think the only time I really get frustrated with KOTOR 2 is the KOTOR Temple, which I think is designed for you to fail, and I understand that's part of the point. But then I'm also like, I don't know. I'm going to have watching. So when I streamed KOTOR 1, it was a very specific experience because I have that whole game memorized, and I was forced against my will to play it dark side. I'm going to play KOTOR 2 light side because, fun fact, I freaking hated playing KOTOR on dark side and it wasn't fun, and I'm not doing it again. But
unless we get to 2,500 subscribers
by Thursday, then sure. Yeah. Then sure. If you can get us 2,500 subscribers by Thursday, I'll play it on the dark side. Only then. But I think that I lost my point because I got so mad thinking about things that happened in KOTOR 2. But no, it's gonna be a different experience because I don't have KOTOR 2 near as memorized as KOTOR 1. Like KOTOR 2, even now I don't think I remember half of the game. And then
and the loot's randomized too.
So. And the loot's random, yeah, which I had even the loot memorized. And like KOTOR is like me talking about how much I love it, and KOTOR 2 is just gonna be me arguing with the game the entire time.
Yeah, come back on Thursday for that.
Yeah, in the end, it feels like that's true. I'd buy that. Mr. Pete is 75% away to the big time. Well, congratulations. Ray will make the same mistakes as Jedi. She might. And Nolan disagrees with something, but I've said like 10 different things, so I don't know what he's disagreeing with, but Nolan disagrees. Anyone who plays KOTOR Dark Side is a cop. Thank you! Did not enjoy it. Everyone was like, it's so fun to play KOTOR on the dark side. I'm like, you get like 75% less story because you just kill everyone. The amazing, beautiful story isn't there because everyone's dead. If anything, I think she will pull into Obi-Wan and go into exile, maybe. I don't know if she's going to go into exile. Oh, so you were disagreeing with, I think it was Dale. Somebody in chat. We'll see. I don't think we're going to know what Rey does for a very long time. I think they're going to take a break. I think Clone Wars will answer a few things. It's possible. We largely know what happens in Clone Wars, though, because Filoni was very open about what happens in the episodes that never aired, because he never thought they were coming back. I mean, we already know how the Siege of Mandalore episodes end if you've read the Ahsoka novel. So, there's really... I'm excited for Clone Wars to watch Clone Wars, but there's really going to be very few surprises, I think, in them. Watch me. I'll be happy to be wrong, though. Man, this has been a good conversation, but like I said, I don't know that I have a whole lot more to add, but it's been a good topic.
I think I'm good too, so...
But speaking of Clone Wars, though, next week is the lead up to Clone Wars premiering, so we'll probably talk Clone Wars next week.
Yep. And then we'll have weekly reviews as those episodes come out too. So
I'm excited.
Also, speaking of other things we have going on, it's still early in our new installment of the Port Haven Book Club. You can jump in as Yoda Bauer reads through Most Wanted.
Yep.
Weekly there too. And for every conversation, you can keep this going on our Discord. Is
Yep,
one of the best places for that. So
definitely. That was
if you
really
have
good.
not joined that yet, you can find us there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go for it, John. If it doesn't come through, I'll approve it. But go for it. If not, you can always repost it in the Discord too. But yeah, I think that's really what I got. We've got a lot of cool stuff, like I said, coming up. And if Django has to keep reminding me, but we will be reading The Crystal Star. I did promise that I would do it, and I will do it. I just really have. I haven't been in the mood to read a good book, much less a bad one. So that's been the problem I've been having.
Just wait till you start it, because like the first
Okay,
sentence was problematic for me.
the first sentence is the reason why I haven't started reading it, because I've picked up the book several times, and the first sentence is the solo kids are kidnapped or whatever, and I'm like, oh no. And like every time I sit down, I'm like, I'm gonna read The Crystal Star now. It's that sentence is still there. It hasn't gone anywhere. It hasn't changed.
And it's all downhill from there. So
Thank you, Cal. I appreciate the help. But yeah, we'll go ahead and call it. And yeah, we'll talk to you guys probably normal day next week for the stream, and probably KOTOR at noon Eastern. Thursday. So there you go. But until then,
see you guys later.
bye.
Bye.